Now we're coming to the end of our program here today on Paris Live PM. And today in Live on Live, we're going to take a look at what is going on in the state of Equatorial Guinea. As we reported yesterday, the corruption and embezzlement trial of Vice President Theodorin Nguema Obiang got underway here in Paris. 47-year-old Obiang is charged with laundering a massive amount of money here in France to feed his lifestyle of luxury and sports cars, designer clothes, artworks and real estate, you name it. But he could face up to 10 years in prison if found guilty. Now, today I'm joined in the studio by Sarah Saadoun, who is recently returned from Malabo and is the author of the Human Rights Watch report, How Equatorial Guinea Turned Corruption into an Art Form. Sarah, you're very welcome to the program.
Thank you very much for having me.
Now, you're here in Paris to attend the Obiang trial. Can you just give us a little background to the case to date?
Sure. The trial is actually one of a number of international anti-money laundering investigations into Theodorin, which is how he is known. The first one was in the United States, where the Department of Justice accused Theodorin of laundering tens of millions of dollars in the United States, which that ended in a $30 million settlement. And Switzerland has also opened an investigation into him that is ongoing. In France, Theodorin is accused of having spent tens of millions of dollars, much of which the prosecutors are arguing came directly from the public treasury, buying all sorts of supercars, a mansion, lots of jewelry.
I mean, there's some pretty interesting items on the list, including, I think, Michael Jackson's glove.
That was in the United States.
That was in the United States. But he likes accumulating these things.
Yes.
And I mean, he really is like a kind of a kid in a toy shop, I think, with how he likes to spend his money. But let's look into the U.S. Justice Department. I think he was up for around 300 million, if I believe. But then he made a settlement of 30 million. Is that right?
Well, the 300 million is what the Department of Justice thinks his global assets are. But in the United States, there was about $70 million worth of assets that they were going after. Ultimately, they settled for 30 million, but it's important to note that he actually criminally forfeited a part of that money. So that required an admission of wrongdoing. And the interesting piece of that is that the money now goes back to the people of Equatorial Guinea.
But then how does that happen if the people of Equatorial Guinea or who are running Equatorial Guinea are just going to refilter it through the system and then it comes back out in a bank account in Switzerland?
This is exactly the question we're trying to answer, and what we hope, the hope for the French case, if in fact the French government ends up with a lot of assets on its hands, how does that money get repatriated to the people?
Well, that's the $30 million or the $300 million question.
But there are precedent in Kazakhstan, for example. There was a program that repatriated $115 million in cash payments to people for school and scholarships. So there are precedents of ways to do it, and it's actually incredibly exciting, and it also shows the price of corruption, because when you start thinking about all the good that can come with this money that would otherwise have been sitting in a house in Malibu, California, or in Paris, you start realizing what the costs of corruption are to people.
Indeed, in that report that you just published last week on how Equatorial Guinea turned corruption into an art form, there's the question to ask that you say, or you would maintain, that corruption is a human rights violation. Now, explain what you mean from that.
Yeah, I mean, this is exactly what the report shows, that in Equatorial Guinea, you can paint a direct line between the corruption and the fact that the health and human and education situation there is so dire. And the reason is because the amount that the government spends on health and education is a tiny percentage of its budget. It's so low that we actually found that it violates the rights to health and education for the first time. And the reason, or one of the reasons that the spending is so low, is because so much of that money goes to these enormous infrastructure projects which are rife with self-dealing. A lot of the members of the president's family own companies that get these huge public contracts, which is in fact what in another trial in South Africa, the Theodorin, who's now in trial in France, told the court that the way he gets his money is, that companies, that government officials are allowed to bid on public contracts. And a big part of the public contract price ends up in their bank account. This is the direct quote of Theodorin in the South African case.
But let's look at Theodorin's father, Theodorin Obiang Nguema, who has been in power since 1979. They're in between since he took power and up until now, he's still there. You know, there have been coup attempts, the famous or the infamous Wonga coup of a little over almost 15 years ago now. I think it was 2003, 2004 when it was put in place. But it was the failed coup there. Oil has been discovered in between. But in this report about what you're talking about, what's new?
Well, the new thing is that is the impact of corruption on people. I mean, it's in some ways it's obvious. Everybody knows that corruption, you know, takes from the treasury and from what the government can spend on the people. But what this report shows is the extent to which people pay a price with respect to their health and education. But it also shows the way in which the money is siphoned off. It's not just, you know, broad accusation of corruption. It shows very specifically how one of the major conduits for corruption. And by the way, there are a lot of foreign companies, including French ones, that are operating in the country. And the question becomes, how are they avoiding these conflicts of interest that are rife in the country?
Now, looking at the people, Sarah, you know, we can see now that oil production and, well, definitely the oil price has had an impact on Equatorial Guinea, and the government, you know, is in trouble here. But what about the people? Now, you did mention, you're talking about the people there, education, the facilities that are there, and you have the people on the ground, but also the opposition in exile. Is there any attempt on the ground or abroad to stand up to this corruption, or have they just thrown their hands up to the sky and say, well, that's just the way it is?
There's definitely an attempt to hold the government accountable, and this is also part of what you're seeing, these international anti-money laundering investigations. But about 2 months ago, the president and vice president of the country's main transparency and human rights organization were arbitrarily detained for about a week and only let go once they paid a big fine. So it's very, very difficult to push back against the government, which is why these cases like the one in France are so important. But I wanted to go back to something that you said about the oil prices, because this is a very important moment for the country. The price of oil is very low, but also the oil production in the country has actually declined and will run out in another 20 years unless new reserves are found. On top of that, as you mentioned, the president has been in power for now 38 years. Longest serving president in the world. At some point soon, there's going to have to be a transfer of power. So the country is facing a really stark choice. Which direction are they going to go in? How are they going to handle this economic crisis? How are they going to handle the transfer of power? Are they going to diversify the economy in legitimate ways? Are they going to become in a country that can attract foreign investment? Or not? Or
will it become just even more of a kleptocracy if there's only a 20-year time scale left for the oil production? I take it that Equatorial Guinea is non-OPEC, or is it part of OPEC?
It actually just became part of OPEC.
It just became part of OPEC. Okay.
And it's important to mention that the president's son, who's now on trial, has been promoted to vice president. So this is not just a kind of academic question. I mean, this is a very, very pressing issue for the country.
But back to, very much on that point, and back to the trial, isn't there an element that he was appointed vice president by his father to avoid actually standing trial and looking for immunity?
It certainly does appear that way, given that one of the main defense arguments of the defense is an immunity defense. They're saying that, so long as he is vice president, he should be immune from prosecution.
But he's being tried in absentia. Well, actually, just in a parenthesis, do we have any idea where he is? Is he in Malabo at the moment, or where is he?
I don't have personal knowledge, but I assume that he's in Equatorial Guinea.
So he obviously, if he's being tried in absentia, he didn't appear in the Powers Court yesterday when the trial opened on Monday. But if found guilty, will he ever actually serve the sentence that could be handed to him?
I'm not sure, but what would be very consequential is the amount of assets that potentially the French government can seize, and then the work becomes, how do we, as we mentioned at the beginning, how do we repatriate that so that it benefits the victims of this corruption?
And am I right in saying with the figure that it's 175 million that he's being researched into? Is that right?
That's the amount that the prosecutors are saying that he spent. I mean, in
France alone.
I believe so.
Okay.
The number that they're accusing him of taking from the public treasury is, I believe, 110 million euro.
Okay.
So the actual kind of amounts that will be...
It's kind of how long is a piece of string? Because, I mean, you always have to qualify how much things were worth.
Exactly. And so, but it's an enormous amount of money. And the value of the goods that he had bought are now even higher. The mansion in Avenue Foch alone is estimated to be more than $100 million. So
it literally, we don't know exactly the true value of the things that are spent. So just briefly, how long do we expect this to go on, the trial itself?
Well, the hearings now are set for 3 weeks, but...
it could be anything.
Who knows?
And very finally, we are running out of time here today, Sarah. Is this trial setting a precedent, as this is the first one being brought to court?
This is, I mean,
against African leaders or suspected.
It's been 10 years of litigation, and it's already, had very important consequences for anti-corruption, giving the NGO standing in the case, for example. So absolutely, this is an extremely, extremely important case.
Do we have any idea who might be next?
I have some thoughts in mind, but...
Well, Sarah Saadoun from Human Rights Watch and author of How Equatorial Guinea Turned Corruption into an Art Form. Thank you very much for being on the programme today.
Thank you.